Holy God, open our eyes to your presence, open our ears to your call, open our hearts to your love. Amen. I marvel at the story of Abraham and Sarah and their journey with God. It's an amazing narrative, and like all good literature, it is layered with surprises and delights at every level. And the first thing that strikes me, of course, is the first thing we heard in the reading. It's Abraham's age. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram. When Abram was 99 years old, 99 years old, 99. And the Lord completely disregarded the man's age and says to him, "Walk blamelessly before me, and you will become the father of nations. You and your wife Sarah will have a baby." That's right. You heard it here first, friends. Righteousness will get you pregnant. Try teaching that in health class. Now, of course, I am trying to be funny. Abraham, too, thought it was a joke. Because in the very next verse, if we were to continue reading in Genesis, in verse 17, the text tells us that Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said to himself, "Can a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Can Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child?" A baby at our age, thought Abraham. Now that's funny. So Abraham fell over with laughter. And Sarah did too. Because God is hilarious. Except God wasn't kidding. God was creating. And this is where we are invited to delve more deeply into the narrative and remember that Abraham and Sarah lived in a time of conquest and violence, of extreme tribalism and subsequent oppression. The people were very divided, but our God, whose glory it is always to have mercy, broke into this chaos of our own making and sought to do a new thing for the people and through the people. God sought to create a new tribe, a new community, a holy people who would disrupt the pattern of violence around them. You see, this new community was not created to exist for its own sake like all the rest, but rather it was created for the sole purpose of blessing others. And God, in God's wisdom, started this new thing with an old couple. Did you hear that? A new thing was started with an old couple. This not only defies current conventional wisdom, but ancient wisdom as well. But the story gets even more interesting than that. This new community or tribe or nation was born from a childless couple. Abraham and Sarah were barren. Now, barrenness is used here because it is an attribute of the desert. But so is vastness. And more importantly, so is openness. And perhaps that is what God saw in this unlikely couple of Abraham and Sarah. Perhaps openness is also what God hopes to find in us as well. An openness to movement, to doing things differently. An openness to change. Now, no one likes change. No one. Not really. And yet here we are. For an entire year now, we have had to hyper-modify ourselves personally in how we do things, but also as the church. And clergy like to say that seminary didn't prepare us to be pandemic priests. And in many ways, this is true. I mean, we had 0 classes in infectious disease. Ventilation systems in our buildings, not a single book read on that. Or how to sanitize sacred and historic surfaces without destroying them. And personally, I felt neither comfortable nor ready to be a televangelist, an IT person, or a Zoom expert. But that's on me, because the thing is, seminary did actually try to prepare me for that part. I simply didn't want to. I didn't want to change. Reflecting back, I remember having a conversation with one of my professors who suggested that I use projectors, like a slideshow, to illustrate my sermons or enrich the service or save paper. Screens in the sanctuary are anathema, I hissed in snooty disapproval. And my professor said, "Oh, really? What do you think icons are, Jean?" Ha, well. He wasn't wrong. And look at us now. Hello there, dear faithful, worshiping with us from your sacred screens. It's just that at the time, unlike Abraham and Sarah, I wasn't ready to embrace a paradigm shift. And that's exactly where we find Peter in today's gospel reading. Peter wasn't ready to embrace a paradigm shift, especially one that involves suffering and death. He had just rightly confessed Jesus as the Messiah. And that messianic understanding came with some time-honored traditions, like divine retribution, holy smiting, or at the very least, the ending of the Roman occupation. But here Jesus is explaining that the Messiah instead comes with the cross. The cross, of all things, the ultimate symbol of the empire's oppression and the most scandalous, the most shameful, the most painful way to die. Now, this revelation is not something that one can just laugh off like Abraham. We are not talking about birth or new life here. We are talking about death. And if there was one thing that Peter knew to be true, it's that the Son of God does not suffer and die. But alas, Peter, the Son of Man does. And not only are they the same Son, as Peter will find out, Jesus was actually talking about new life here. Jesus, being a child of humanity, is central to understanding Jesus as the Christ or the Messiah in Mark's gospel. And it's a paradigm shift. A big one. One that perhaps we still don't fully understand. One that the season of Lent can make especially confusing. So I was raised Methodist growing up, and I knew nothing of Lenten ritual or discipline. We just weren't doing that at that time. So everything I learned about Lent, I learned through awkward encounters with my Roman Catholic friends. And my first lesson occurred in 4th grade. My sister had made these wonderful chocolate-topped peanut butter bars, and I had packed a couple of these squares in my lunch for dessert at school. And at lunchtime, I offered a square to my best friend. And she looked at me sadly and declined. "I can't have that," she told me. "It's candy." And I gave up sweets for Lent. Well, temptress that I apparently am, I replied, "Only the top is candy. The bottom is peanut butter. It's good for you." And her eyes brightened. Yes, I had found the Lenten loophole. And that's how we shared my dessert. I ate off the tops, the chocolate tops, because I'm helpful. And then I offered her the bottoms. It's hard to believe now, but I wasn't really trying to tempt my friend. I was trying to be generous. I had a lot to learn, apparently. In college, she and I were roommates at MSU, and I remember ordering pizza late on Friday nights in Lent and having to wait until after midnight to eat it, or if we were so hungry that we couldn't wait, we could pick the pepperoni off and we would save it in a pile until the magic hour arrived and it was no longer Friday. And I'm not mocking my friend. I admire her a lot. I admired her ability to stick with her disciplines in spite of once succumbing to a fourth grade temptress. But I never really understood the reason behind her behavior. When I asked her why she gave things up for Lent, she told me it was so she could, in some small way, understand the suffering Jesus went through. Now, her piety was pure. She never made a big deal about it. She was a righteous example. And yet, her response never really worked for me. And maybe it was my Methodist sensibilities coming through, because for me, it felt backwards. It seems to me that the incarnation, Jesus dwelling among us as one of us, as the Son of Man, was all about God demonstrating an understanding of our suffering, and consequently showing us how to respond. It's a paradigm shift. Jesus turning the cross into compassion, turning the crucifixion from a horror story into a love story. Well, that's the biggest paradigm shift of all, isn't it? We are human. We know about injustices. We know about division and turmoil. We know about violence. We know about suffering. And Lord, have mercy, do we know about death? And not for nothing, you and I, we also know about having to say goodbye and Godspeed to a pastoral relationship we had grown to love, because we've both recently had to do so. And ours is not a new narrative. None of this is. The human condition is actually quite ancient. Older than 99, even. And part of our work, our grief work, in particular this Lent, and throughout our transition, is to hold fast to the truth that God can, God does, and God will do something new for us and through us. as well. May it be so.